Okay, it should be. Okay, it's recording. Great. I want to welcome everyone to our shared conversation this month. We'll be talking about trends in online and digital learning and so forth, and we'll have Evan Abbey, which I'll let him introduce himself. Just to give you a quick introduction, my name is Jeff Craven. I'm the Executive Director of NAMTC. And we're pleased to be able to offer these kinds of professional development opportunities to our members as well as guests as well. Just a quick plug, on May 9th and 10th in Syracuse, New York, we'll actually have our Northeast Regional Leadership Summit, and we'll be having keynotes by Hall Davidson, Neethi Thomas from the Learning Accelerator, as well as a copyright attorney from Washington, D.C., actually works with AIM. Some of you folks may be familiar with that, but he'll be talking about digital copyright issues and so forth. So looking forward to, we got a pretty dynamite program set up coming up here in May. If you need any more information, go to the NAMTC website, namtec.org, and check it out. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over here to Evan, just going to talk a little bit about some of the online and digital learning trends and so forth. So Evan, take it away.
All right. Just a quick introduction. My name is Evan Abbey. I'm the Program Director for AEA Learning Online. The service agencies in Iowa are called AEAs, which stands for Area Education Agency. And we have 9 of us in the state, and then we have 2 collaborative programs amongst the AEAs. One is our purchasing arm, and then the other is our online learning arm, and we do. That arm has kind of grown and sprung in different directions over the years. So we do oversee online learning, but we are doing a lot of other infrastructure type things as well within the system. So I am intending this to be more of a conversation, and it might be difficult to do with the setup and as far as people having access to talk and such, but can we, I want you to see if you have access to the chat pod, not pod per se, but the chat nav bar that comes up in Zoom. If you can open that up and try sending a chat to us, I just want to make sure that that's working. And if not, I will improvise. Jeff, do you know if the chat is active for participants? Yep. Okay, I just got something from Otis. Excellent. Well, that's a great idea. If you would, if you could do what Otis did, just go ahead and introduce yourself as well as where you are from in the chat area. Very good. ESU 17. My knowledge of the ESUs is growing, but I don't know very much about ESU 17. Brian, you just joined us. What we're doing is we're doing a quick round of introductions via the chat. So if you would open up your chat within the Zoom, and you can go ahead and just do a quick introduction of yourself, where you're from, what you do, similar to what Otis, Patty, and Diana have done. So. While you do that, what I'm going to do is, I mean for this to be a collaborative discussion, but at the same token, I know that with smaller numbers and the format for Zoom here, oftentimes there isn't a lot of verbal talking discussion and such, but we will have a chance to go ahead and share some thoughts. So I've got, was given a topic that is kind of nebulous, and online and digital learning trends, what's trendy and such. And depending on who you ask, they'll come up with different terms. And so I'm going to kind of characterize those into things, to different categories, if you will. And I'd like you to help provide what you think of. You can provide one thing. So the first thing, if you will, is our passé category. So what's a thing in digital learning that needs a freshness update? It's a trend within digital learning. It's been around for a little while and has kind of maybe lost its luster. And what with that, kind of think about how could that be updated? What might be on the horizon to update that? So I'll give you a for instance, and then if you would like to in the chat, you can add your own. The term blended learning has been around quite a long time, and you'll still, in conversations like this, ooh, trend, we're gonna have more movement towards blended learning. Well, the term was popularized almost a decade ago, and we had a whole effort around standardizing models around blended learning and putting into play a lot of specific structures on how you go and build blended learning programs and things like that. And so to still refer to it as a trend within digital learning is probably, if it's still a trend at this point in time, then, and it hasn't kind of worked its way into the mainstream, then there's something wrong with it. So what needs to be done, I think more so within the case of schools when it comes to blended learning, is that I think they need better operationalization of how to implement that on a larger scale. And such. So I would throw that out as an example, and I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes here to think about that. As you think about digital learning, what's a thing, a buzzword term that's been around for a while that might need a freshness update? Feel free to add those to the chat. I'm practicing my wait time here. So look at what Otis added about the new tech tool of the day. Go ahead and insert the tool. Coming more about that and less about how to use the tool to meet the needs of the students. And there is certainly a desire within technology integration to adopt a certain tool that has become popular. One of the things that I'm interested in is that we offer a professional development course in how to use Pinterest in the classroom. Teachers can get licensed renewal credit in Iowa for it, as well as even graduate credit. And it's very popular, as you can imagine. Kind of floats to the top of our catalog. And so when we offer the course, one of the things we talk about is the research-based principles behind it. So the concept of social bookmarking and how that works on a level, how visual literacy works, and how you can utilize a tool for specific purposes and not for others. And then the accumulating projects, they need to create a lesson plan that implements Pinterest in a way that is better integration than just picking a tool for the sake of doing it. And despite all of what we talk about of, what is the purpose behind the tool and how it leads to social bookmarking and how it leads to this and that, they often will create lesson plans that still, Pinterest could be replaced by any other tool. You could create a Google site page or whatever else case to go and share links with other other students in the class. So. Patty mentioned the SAMR model of tech integration. Maybe update that thought with the Triple E framework. We use SAMR quite a bit in Iowa. We also use blooms, and we use webs, and we use different taxonomies of different things. It doesn't, one thing we have internalized over many years is that people say they understand it, but they don't really understand it. In other words, when you, for blooms is easy to see this, so you could give your class of however many participants an activity and say, okay, what level of Bloom's taxonomy is this? And either one of two things will happen. Either they'll be all over the board on it, or they'll do a straight match of the verb to where the verb is under like the verb chart for Bloom's taxonomy, which is really hard with the verb create, because a lot of activities and objectives that use the word create are not creation activities. They are actually things that are just even busy work or whatever. Like, okay, we're creating definitions to different terms. Okay, well, that's at the knowledge and comprehension level more so than it is the create level. So the framework becomes something that people think they know, and they really don't. SAMR is really at that level too. And ironically, going back to that same Pinterest course that we use, a professional development course, we're talking about how to use Pinterest in the classroom. One of the things we talk about the depth of integration on the SAMR scale, and so that's one of the criteria that we use for the rubric is how well does your final project integrate Pinterest? Is it at the substitution level where you could have just as easily used another piece of technology? Is it pre-SAMR, which means that it's actually not having anything to do with the learning objectives, it's just playtime or whatever? Or does it really get at higher levels? And one of the first misnomers is that they think that everything has to be at the redefinition level, and that that's the best, right? And another thing is that they think that redefinition is doable, just like the create level within Bloom's. That any project can get up there and utilize technology in a redefinition mode, and that's not really the case. Redefinition is very, very difficult to achieve. Utilizing technology in a purpose that just redefines how we conceive of learning in general. And so using scales like that have some benefit, but when they become passe, as we're saying here, it actually can inhibit it, because you think you're at one level of depth or mastery or whatever the case is, and you're really not. So those are great suggestions. I'm going to go ahead and when visiting with schools locally and kind of doing this exercise, we hear a lot of these terms. So blended learning, I mentioned. Personalized learning is probably the biggest one that individuals have heard of. It's been around for a long time. And unlike blended learning, the models for personalized learning are really sketchy. They're not defined really at all. There's some principles of personalized learning. There's a national definition around it that you want to give you want to personalize around student needs, student interests, and student abilities, or what they're ready for, their present level of performance and such like that. But as far as actual models to go and implement that becomes difficult, and it becomes difficult for service agencies to scale and promote more personalized learning, because it's almost antithetical, right? You've got individual teachers who might do some personalized learning in their classroom. To go and scale that to a school, it becomes tough, because you're trying to roll out school-wide personalized learning, which will seem to be the opposite. And then you take it to a district, and then if you have a service agency, okay, they're trying to provide services that they can scale out to all districts everywhere, but that are personalized, and that becomes very difficult. So adaptive learning has been around now, very popular for 3 or 4 years. one of the trends that we're seeing with adaptive learning is that it is becoming, it is going through the transitions that a lot of technologies and content goes through, of taking it outside of the realm of people with the money, Pearson and other providers who have spent a lot of money creating that, and really pushing the envelope to see if we can utilize open educational resources of adaptive learning. Khan Academy is the big pusher in that. Now, they might not have the best product for adaptive learning, but they have the biggest usage and amount of users of a free adaptive learning product, just because of their widespread popularity and such. And that has some added benefit because more philanthropists and other individuals are looking at the possibility of creating adaptive learning offerings that then are free and available for schools to use. But there still is, I think, some need to go and talk about how do we make adaptive learning better. Just sitting a student on adaptive learning program and software doesn't beget learning in of itself, and I think that's one of the big issues. Gamification, virtual reality, augmented reality are other terms that get thrown out quite a bit. Obviously, all have a big presence within online learning, but I would agree with what a lot of the individuals are saying about that. It's like, it's great that it is a term with promise, but we need promise to turn into actuality at some point in time. So. All right, my next question. New terms, trendy, but what is it? So what's the thing that you've heard buzz about, something new? It could be, and I don't know where you might have heard it from, social media, Twitter, national conferences that you've gone to, any other outlet. So while it has quite a bit of true believers in the K-12 system, it doesn't really seem to have anybody who's mastered it yet. And so something you're curious about, you think, yeah, there's some potential, but you just haven't quite seen how that's put into operation, let alone for a service agency to take that and then help schools throughout a big region go and do that. So think about that term and give you a couple minutes to weigh in on that. We'll take a look at those. Very nice, Otis. Otis, do you have a lot of schools utilizing voice assistants in their classroom? I'm a little bit removed from the face-to-face classroom. I've got some connections with it, but I work more with schools, utilize, kind of going into the online realm and such. And I know that there are some districts that do consider it very trendy, but we don't have very much usage that I've seen within Iowa for that. Yep, I can definitely see why a lot would say no to that. So that's interesting. That's good. That's probably true of Iowa too. We've heard some chatter about that. Go ahead and finish up your thoughts, and while you do that, I'm going to actually forward to the next slide here. And Otis, you actually had one on my list that I've heard about, and actually it's kind of a larger category too. So the voice assistance is probably the most well-known one, but there's other chat bots on computers. When it comes to online learning, you have kind of intelligent assistant things that can be added to that, like, hey, I can assist you. What questions do you have? It reminds me of Clippy from the early Microsoft days, just to date myself there. I know they're called intelligent assistants, and I don't think that would apply to Clippy as much, but he tried, right? So, one of the things that, and OER is not a new term. It is trendy in Iowa. We're having more and more individuals talk about it. It certainly is probably in the passé category in other states, because I think a lot of states, I know Utah has had a statewide push for OER for many, many years, being the home of David Wiley and such. But New York and Washington and a couple other states too have had big pushes for that. Iowa is starting to get to that level, but I think it's at a critical juncture now where trendy only goes so far, and they need to have some clarity about what it can provide and such. Because OER is really not about stuff. It's not about free stuff. It's about a philosophy, if you will, of ownership. Who owns it, and the more closer to the user in terms of who owns knowledge, the better off it is. That's the philosophy. So that if you have OER content that's created by, say, a teacher, and then another teacher goes and modifies it, customizes it, and then students are able to modify it and customize it, that's kind of the best of it, because then it's always up to date. It's applicable to local settings. It's changing for different changes we have in demographics and understanding. I mean, there's a lot of textbooks that become cringeworthy just on the basis of some of the stereotypes that they've used and such, let alone the content in them. And OER allows for a larger audience to kind of weigh in and say, well, let's reword this. Let's think of our examples that we're using here to illustrate this and such. So, yep, Patty, I know I've been visiting with many individuals from the ESUs on OER and their OER. We too have a OER Commons initiative that we're trying to push there, and we're having some usage and things like that. So there's some success, but there are other things too that we need to work on. So that third one, actually, I should say micro-credentials. Micro-learning is something separate that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. But micro-credentials are things that people have been talking about for a couple of years, different ways to go and document learning other than seat time. The other thing, social learning via communities of practice. NAMTC would be one of those as well. The one I hear a lot about, and this is really big in Iowa, is what we call authentic learning. This would be, especially on the K-12 level, of connecting students with actual authentic environments, so actual people in the workplace, or authentic tasks and such. And that isn't necessarily under the domain of online learning or digital learning. I am biased, so I think it can enhance those. But it's just kind of in general. There's a big work-based learning initiative and such. It's all well and good. No one's going to say, oh, I'm against authentic learning. But it also can become kind of an exercise in just kind of futzing around with things without really getting into, well, how do you do this effectively? So the reason I bring that one up is that as a person who kind of oversees online learning program, I have attended the iNACOL conference for many, many years. And it's undergone a metamorphosis over the past few years. It kind of goes along with these questions here, that about 4 or 5 years ago, really the emphasis in iNACOL switched to blended learning, which is a combination of online and face-to-face, kind of makes sense. Then it migrated more to personalized learning, and then it migrated more to competency-based education. This past year, work-based learning or authentic learning was by far the biggest component, the most presentations there. There's very few strictly fully online learning type of presentations. And as a person who was trying to find those, I was kind of at the point where there wasn't very much there for me. So I see that as kind of a big trend, that even national organizations that have kind of been built around online learning or digital learning, you'll see more of that at ISTE, you'll see more of that at other national conferences, are trying to incorporate this idea of authentic and work-based learning. All right, couple more I want to do. Under the radar. So this is a thing that does not have the buzz, maybe, but this is something that you see might having a significant effect on quality student learning. So this might be, and whether this is a thing in of itself, or if you just have to describe what it is, but what do you see having a big effect on student learning in the realm of digital and online learning? Yeah, social emotional learning, and I apologize. Keep typing if you're composing your thoughts. I'm just going to reflect on what Otis is saying here. Social emotional learning is that just this year, in fact, just in the past few months, I've really seen it being put forward as a thing, right? A term, a buzz term, and I'm I don't want to say sensitive. The word I'm always kind of oh that's a new thing. Is that a thing? Is someone else going to say that same thing over here? And is this a thing that we need to know about? Are people going to be asking about this in a few years and such? And I think social emotional learning is definitely a thing. It's tied to we've got a big movement in Iowa around mental health, which is its own thing and certainly an important thing. And I think social emotional learning, it's certainly not something new. Gardner had that as an important aspect of the emotional intelligences, different, the pedagogy around modalities, certainly nationwide counselors and things like that. Yeah, have been talking about it for years. But I think, and of course, there were always efforts on, trying to do inventories to find out what kind of learner you are and such. But we're even getting more to understanding, being able to articulate your own understanding of yourself as a social or emotional person. And I think that's important, is not just to equate that with learning style. So that's a really good point. Yes, copyright issues. And you notice that copyright issues is something that, when it comes to online and digital learning, it always seems to be kind of connected to a trend. It's like, copyright is never going to be trendy. It's not like, oh, hey, we're going to have a new conference and the topic of this conference is going to be copyright. And look, all the people come in, right? I know at Iowa's conference, they have an iTech conference for technology integration and such, and we'll have a session on copyright almost every year. The understanding of copyright and the actual application of it does change annually. You can actually, if you wanted to, have a standing discussion every year and say, hey, here are the new court cases regarding copyright, or here's the new changes in understanding of the law, and how it's implemented. And it's really interesting when we visit with teachers about this. What I try to do when I'm asked to go out and present on copyright or do some work with teachers on copyright, I basically will, the best scenario I found for it is a scenario-based one. I explain a court case and I have them explain whether they think it's a break of copyright or not. And in all the answers, there's a lot of gray in those and such. So we're getting information on that. One of the things with, you had mentioned music is a oh, okay, maybe that's with evaluating the materials students have access to. Sorry, Pat, I'm just reading through your comments here. So, one of the things that we see when it comes to copyright in the online world is what is the nature of an LMS do for there's the Teach Act and when it comes to online copyright and such. But what does it do for your ability to go and share what would otherwise be copyrighted materials? And many years ago, they didn't know. The first court case happened to be with UCLA that revolved around that. And there was kind of a narrow decision around that said UCLA was breaking copyright by placing digitized forms of their textbooks that they used in class into an online format. But then there were subsequent court cases that said no, universities could do that as long as they followed certain guidelines to restrict the possible loss to a vendor. If they had the actual copies of the textbooks and were just making the mode of access for them more available to students as opposed to trying to get out of buying more copies of such. And so that became a big, that was kind of an interesting thing to talk about, because with the proliferation of LMSs, be those, Canvas or Moodle or even like a Google Classroom, it's very easy to go and put things on there. And even to put, worksheets and things like that on there, the question is for teachers is, should you? The answer I see more than not is teachers, more than they don't, erroneously think that they're breaking copyright. So they think they're breaking copyright more than they are. And yet they still tend to think, well, that's okay. They don't say it in those words, but they'll say it as though, it's a small thing, right? That type of thing. And the reality is that they actually have a lot more leeway than they might think within, permissions to go in and provide things under copyright guidance, but they still need to have a good understanding of what it is. So, all right, so good things there. Some of the things that I have are, and these kind of minor things. They are technology related, but I think one of the things that has been around for a while, but I think it has probably one of the best bang for the buck in terms of helping with learning is interactive video. And you can do this through simple free tools like Edpuzzle or other things like that. But at a basic conceptual level, it's taking video and putting into it points of interaction for the student or the viewer so that they're not just watching it en masse. There's been a lot of studies onto what's the best levels of retention for different media in an online course. You have video, you've got text, you've got synchronous conversation and things like that. And they find the video is, while it's the most likely chosen because it's seen as an interactive element, it's not the best for actual learning in terms of what's processed from it, because students have a quicker turnaround time to go and get zoned out from video than they do from text or other things. Now, I'm not sure that's the case from my own personal experience, but I'm not sure it's not the case either. So it was something that I was kind of interested in finding out more about. And so one of the keys is there's certain rules of thumb about, especially in flipped learning, about how long you make your videos to keep students' attention and such. Oftentimes they suggest limiting your video to basically the grade +1, so that if you have a third grade student, don't make your video longer than 4 minutes, or else they're not going to pay attention to anything after 4 minutes. Doesn't mean that you might not want to make it shorter either. But even 15-minute videos for adults is pushing it in terms of an adult's ability to go and interact with it. You've been listening to me for 37 minutes now, so and we're probably at that level too here. What can you do to go in and create interactivity within that video, to stop the video, put in a question that they can ask and then maybe, you know, or branch logic so they can fast forward to different parts of the video that apply to them, whatever the case is. Actually put in interactives where they could click on something to go see more information about it. Those are easy things, and there's more sophisticated things coming out that will take video and make it more. Because we use video so much in blended learning, online learning, digital learning, the actual small level tools to go and make it interactive are becoming very important. Content curation is another item that, especially amongst service agencies, has become big. I at AEA Learning Online have been kind of in an effort now to work with different entities in the state to help them curate content. Since there's so much content out there, they can create a collection of content that they support, that they say, yeah, this does a good job of teaching X. So the statewide math team in Iowa has found content, OER content, but also proprietary content, or even it's free content, but not maybe OER. But they found it available out there, and they've identified this to say, yeah, this is content that is aligned to certain standards in the Iowa core. It meets certain objectives that the group is after. If they're like, you know, the STEM Council in the state of Iowa or something like that, has different efforts with that. So helping those groups go and actually curate content is something that service agencies often have a lot of expertise in, because they're a good bridge between media literacy and understanding media, the technology services to go and actually do that in an efficient manner, as well as the curriculum and you know, standards behind the curriculum to say what curriculum should be applied. And it's a lot of work to go and create collections like that, curate them. But there is a lot of bang for the buck, because a lot of schools will then are very likely to adopt those rather than have their teachers go and do it themselves. Another thing too is the aspect of user-generated content. This kind of fits in with OER, but even if it's an entity where teachers really aren't sharing it through a process of looping it, which OER is, giving them tools to go in and create their own content. Well, again, video is the flip video craze has been very popular doing it, but even now text-based lessons and other interactives is a good way of doing that. I mentioned micro-learning before versus micro-credentialing. Micro-learning is basically to say, instead of treating learning as a course, break that down into as small building blocks as possible, and then give students the choice of accessing those for their own learning purposes. And you see a lot of trends for that. Even some that take courses like Coursera or Udemy or some others like that have really started breaking down their content into video, into interactives, individual lessons that can be taken a la carte by a student, or maybe a teacher helping a student you know, get those and then utilize those. And then taking those and applying them to some other instructional activity outside of that learning task. And I'll mention that more a little bit. By far the biggest thing for me in the last year is the talk of accessibility with the accessible content and such, and making sure that any aspect of your digital learning has measures in it for accessibility. And I think that's the part that we don't realize how bad at it we are. We don't realize how, you know, we utilize video all the time, and much of our video is not captioned. The video that is captioned is not captioned very well, and we don't really understand how important captioning is for the learner, and even for students that do that. So yeah, Diana's linked to the cone of learning. I don't know, Diana, what's tell me a little bit more about the cone of learning. Yes, okay. So we've seen that chart before. it's actually a fictitious chart, but it's the principles of it I think we can kind of agree with. Like, you learn so much by reading, so much by seeing, so much by doing, and then the bottom level is so much by teaching others, right? And that's kind of the ultimate level. If you can get a student to really teach somebody else that concept, they will learn it the best. That's what it argues. And so this is, you see the article that Diana linked to. I'm going to read that. It kind of looks at that process of going through and getting beyond the easy aspect of e-learning down to what is kind of more the deeper experiential learning modalities. And I really like that. I'm going to talk about a term here coming up called, it's not new, it's scaffolding is the term that we use quite a bit in Iowa. But that online learning needs to be seen more in the context of scaffolding. What can you use it to do here, not in of an end itself, but to better support these more rigorous, and rigorous a loaded word, but these deeper levels of interaction. If you can get students to go and go through an enacted scenario or role play or even an authentic experience, your online learning lessons or activities or assessments can go in and be good scaffolding to help make sure that they're ready for those. Good. Thanks for sharing that. My last question for you is, I want to move past the tools. We talked about, Otis had mentioned that so much of it is tech tool focused. So I want to look at instructional design. And that's my focus whenever I'm visiting with schools, is that one of the things that all teachers should know, but don't, or all teachers should be, but don't think of themselves as, is an instructional designer. Every teacher, including into a facilitator of learning, a coach, all these different roles that we play when we work with students. One aspect that we have is instructional designer. Now, online teachers do think of themselves as that. It's kind of a wedded thing in there. But when teachers are developing or utilizing digital learning in their classrooms, they really need to think of themselves as an instructional designer and such. So what are some aspects of instructional design that take us towards deeper levels of learning that might not have a, and you could apply those to different technology trends or whatever? And you're thinking of it here, this is a tough question a lot of times, and I find it a very poignant question for service agencies and consultants alike to go and ask of their teachers, because oftentimes when it comes to digital learning, when we talk about trends and we talk about what's the best to do, the answers will go to either to an answer around technology or specific applications of technology using this tool or these type of tools or whatever, or around pedagogy. It'll be project-based learning. Well, that's a pedagogical model. Authentic learning. Well, that's personalized learning. That's a pedagogical model. What is the actual nuts and bolts instructional design that you would put into a lesson that's going to make your digital learning better? So, good. All right. So here are some, and I actually have mentioned, it's tough for me to go and talk about these in a way that I don't preface this beforehand. But one of the big things is getting away from a simple transmission level of content where an individual is telling students, a teacher is telling students, here's what you need to know. towards creating ways in which students find out. They learn through going through the experience. Scenario-based learning, it's not a new concept. It's not a tech tool. It's really a design tool. One of the design tools you might have mentioned that was applied to technology, the internet, was Bernie Dodge's web quests, and it was an inquiry-based tool. So inquiry-based learning was the pedagogical model, but it created a design infrastructure to help teachers, develop a lesson that students could go through a scenario and learn about a topic. And you'll see a lot more of that in digital learning, I think, over the next few years as teachers kind of see themselves in the boat of, yes, I am in a one-to-one environment, or I am doing blended learning, or whatever the case is. I'm going to go and I want to ramp that up. One of the ways I can do so is removing myself from the presenter and creating more scenarios for individuals to go through. So, another emphasis is on narrative and storytelling too, and this is really big in terms of online learning environments, and I think it applies to digital storytelling, or it applies to blended learning and face-to-face classrooms. Face-to-face classrooms have actually used narrative and storytelling very well for years. I think of some of my best teachers growing up, and they were the best storytellers. I loved just kind of hearing their stories. Some of them were analogies to help kind of take a concept and make it applicable to us. Some of it was, think alouds, and other things like that to show the metacognitive processes. There were a lot of different techniques kind of behind the curtain that the person was using, but utilizing stories is one way to best communicate. We learn very well with stories. There's lots of research behind that. And online learning really has struggled with this, and this is one of the biggest reasons why it can be seen as not very engaging for individuals, either in video or in text. We think of text as being more boring, but a lot of online video is not very narrative or storytelling. So that's one of the things that we really push when we train new instructors and such. We really push the aspect of storytelling and using narrative with a concept, as opposed to just telling people what they need to know. Another term that's very important is social presence. And again, this is a term that has a long-standing tradition of research within online instructional design. Social presence is to say that there is, whenever you're online or over a distance, for distance learning, you don't have the social presence. You're not in the same room. But you can kind of enact that social presence. You can kind of overcome that barrier by doing certain things. You can feel like you're connected, you're in the same room with them. And so there are techniques that you can do. And that can be things like narrative and storytelling. It can be things like, how well do you even know your instructor? What are the personality quirks, and how does the humor get, translated over an online environment? All of those are very key aspects to learning. The University of Wisconsin at Madison did a very big longitudinal study with programs, with students going through their online programs, and they found one of the key aspects for students' success. What are the courses they did better in, as well as what are the courses that they would recommend to other students, were ones that they identified as getting to know their instructor better. And that was kind of a measure of this idea of social presence. So that's a big aspect for that. I think utilizing more and more formative assessments and giving those into the hands of students so they can make their own assessment of their learning and such, their own checks for understanding in an online and digital environment. That's where online and digital learning really shines, is that you can give assessment tools to students, because in a face-to-face classroom, it's really tough to do that. It seems like the teacher is always there kind of judging you, but in an online world, you can do that. And I've mentioned scaffolding before, where you take online learning and utilize it for something else. So, all right, I want to share a couple other things here in the time we've got left, and we'll leave a little bit of time for questions that you might have at the end if you have any. This is a book that and this is actually a series of books, releases a book every year, I believe. believe. I think he's done so for about 6 years. This is, and it isn't specific to education. This is more so around just trends in the world. There is 5 categories to each book, and one of which is in education. But there's things in business and in technology and other things like that. And so in the 2018 version of the book, he identifies 15 different things. And I actually got enlightened about the book through a blog that I got through one of my feeds and such. And they had identified 6 of the items that related to the book. And and these are kind of interesting aspects to things to think about. And one of which that he mentions in there is this idea of Lightspeed Learning, which is kind of like micro-learning, but making learning opportunities more quickly accessible and more at the fingertips of the learners themselves. When working with adults, as service agencies do, this is definitely an item that we need to do. We can have great professional learning opportunities for teachers and individuals alike, but we need to make that more accessible right there and reduce the amount of hoops that they would jump through. He talks about the term human mode, which kind of touches base with that idea of social presence and how you can go and connect with an actual human. That's one of the things that there's kind of a backlash to social media, because a lot of individuals are seeing that as disconnecting you from humans. What are ways in which we can get more close connections? What I find interesting, and again, I think this is really good for service agencies to think about, and it's not really within the context of learning per se, but it's as you as an organization. He coins it as brand stand, and what that means is there is a tendency to try to go and make your brand, your agency, do everything to everyone. And if you try to do everything to everyone, you end up doing nothing to nobody, right? Or nothing to everybody, whatever the case is. You end up basically, you can't do it. You can't do it all. And there are a lot of brands that went out and tried to do it all before they learned to scale back and hone in on the things that they were known for, that they were known as the industry leader in, that they could do, very well. And I think that's kind of been the lesson over time. Even Microsoft tried to go in and, replicate what Apple was doing over here and Google was doing over here. And since then, it's been scaling back and trying to focus in on, things that it does very well. Service agencies kind of need to think about that too. And in Iowa, we're struggling with that. The AEAs very much want to do anything that districts need. If districts need X, well, how can we help? We don't want to say no. Districts need Y, how can we help? What do they need to know? And one of the problems is that it kind of dilutes your effectiveness. It kind of dilutes how you go in and are able to help them. So sometimes it's beneficial to say, just because these are the things that we prioritize, that we think are the biggest things, so we're going to push for that the most. So others in there, backstory telling, kind of giving, one of the trends in learning in general is to go back and give you kind of the story behind the story, and that's a big thing in kind of social media. If you look at like YouTube channels that are exploding, that's one of those things that that's doing that. Enlightened consumption and truthing are very much in that same line. There's so much of a presence of information overload out there, and that a lot of people are like, well, who can we go in and we can trust? And service agencies can create trusted relationships and help connect individuals with learning opportunities, even if it's not their own, that might be beneficial. So not that there's certainly no kickback for me if you purchase the book. If it's available via library, go check it out there. But I thought that was kind of an interesting way of looking at trends, because so much of trends is looked at as far as actual buzzwords and things like that. And I think this was kind of a good way of going and analyzing that. So the other thing too that I'm going to leave with is, what is AEA Learning Online, my agency, doing when it comes to trends and things over the past year? We are establishing, in conjunction with some other organizations, a clearinghouse of authentic projects. And what I mean by that is we're building a place where businesses and community partners can can basically, it's almost like a want ad, can say, we're looking for schools to partner with us around this type of authentic project that they would investigate in. And it could be something that is to the level of like an apprenticeship for students. It could be something not, more scaled back, like an internship or something along the, the lines work-based learning, or it could be an in-class project that's done in the classroom. But one of the problems that we have is that while businesses and industries want to do more in working with schools, it's not a very efficient way to go about doing it, especially if they're an organization that has many locations and they're trying to, work with entities across the state. So that's one of the projects that we're working on. Another project that we're working on is single sign-on, which is not new. A lot of service agencies are working on kind of that aspect. But the thinking behind it is we want to get quicker access to opportunities to teachers and eventually students too. And so the sign-on aspect is one of the biggest barriers to doing that. They will basically, it doesn't matter how quality the learning is if the sign-on is cumbersome. So the more you can get a single sign-on access that's single click, that gets them in, that creates less headaches for people. And then if you can connect that to analytics in terms of what's being used well and such, that's the best use, the best intersection of a single sign-on. We are putting in a lot of resources into interactivity in our content. We're using a free tool called H5P that a lot of other entities know about. It's not earth-shattering, but if you don't know about it, it is a great tool. You can go in and create interactives that you can embed within your LMS or your other content that you're developing, you can and such. And we're promoting this for teachers in blended learning environments and flipped learning environments and fully online learning environments as one aspect to doing that. I mentioned interactivity in video as well as another thing. So that's a big push that we're doing. Another big push that we're doing is what we call the Netflix model. And this is a behind-the-scenes thing, but it goes back to kind of giving people quick access. Our current systems, we have a system of self-paced professional learning opportunities, as well as facilitated professional learning opportunities. And then we've got things for students as well. And with the new clearinghouse that we're creating very much a Netflix type of interface where students can scroll in and basically get a visual display of a project that's available. Click on it and get kind of the information, and they can save it, or they can go in, and in this case they would use the interface to apply for to show interest in this particular project or such. And we're finding that the view of how you share your offerings to people makes a big difference. And so we're looking at trying to go in and change a lot of our other systems. And then this is a cliche. I hate to end on a cliche, but a lot of things to go and empower learners themselves. Putting in more and more elective opportunities, even in a course that we're offering for credit. We're breaking that down and offering more electives within it. You can go in and assemble your own a course in this topic by having more options. Students having their own opportunities to create their own content and such. And so there's a lot of ways to go and actually implement empowering learners to make their own choices and to have more power and say in things. But that's kind of a trend that I'm going to end with. So with that, we are at the end of our time. If you have any questions, I will stay around for a couple more minutes. But otherwise, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to the next shared conversation we have.
Thanks, Evan. I don't know if there are any more questions from the group. Certainly, I really enjoyed this presentation because a lot of those trends that you talked about, flipped learning and so forth, they were kind of lives that I've lived, where everyone, it just seems, especially in educational and instructional technology, it's like what you call it, the shiny object syndrome or whatever, but it's like, this is the next best thing, it's going to transform. And it's like, I'm a firm believer in what I've seen is I don't think there's going to be one specific tool that's going to be the cure-all to end-all for some of these things. So you just kind of interested to see how different things morph and so forth. And it's the single sign-on. I mean, that thing has been an issue for years, and it's like, I mean, it's something you would think would be simple at some point, but unfortunately, it hasn't been.
Well, and that's something that we at Iowa are focusing as a trend. Other states have had that for many years, so I don't want to indicate we're kind of, I would say, behind the times on that. But I did do something purposeful in this. I get frustrated with going to presentations that are glitz and glamour. Let me go and show you the new bells and whistles, and and there's more, and we go and show you. And I say that delivering. In fact, I'm going to go deliver one of those in 30 minutes right now. So I know that there's a lot of that. So one of my intentions when creating this was to have no images whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of discussion topics and things like that. But that's kind of telling to the point that so much of education can be, of sharing with people can be what is the trendiest thing, the shiniest object and such. And if you can remove yourself from doing that, or create some barriers from you just adopting that, and you actually have to engage in discussions about these type of things, I think that does lead to better thought and better purpose behind those. So
I agree 100%.
All right. Well, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. And again, I look forward to being at our next shared conversation.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for your time, Evan. Thanks everyone else for taking time and attending. See you soon.